Every ideal in some way comes down to forgetting self and giving our best to others. That's why humility is the foundation of our ability to live every ideal. It makes us capable of bonds, so it makes us capable of actually loving the others.
Before we get started, if you enjoy these episodes, you might want to check out more at OptimalWork.com. Our website offers unique content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond. We have an in-depth masterclass covering our entire theory of growth, daily recommendations for personalized advice, and a platform to help groups and organizations learn and practice optimal work together. You can get a free trial at OptimalWork.com. Now let's start the episode. Hey, this is Sharif here with another episode of the OptimalWork Podcast, joined by Dr. Kevin Majeres. Kevin, great to be here with you again.
Sharif, thanks for having me back. It's great to be back.
Yeah, of course, Kevin. Well, a couple weeks ago, we did our episode on extreme ownership. And so it was great to think about leadership. And one of the promises we made was to do then an episode on humility and leadership. And I thought maybe just to set the stage for that discussion, one thing I was thinking about was the way that work is not just like an individual activity. I sometimes think about it that way because I do a lot of programming and, I'm just me doing my thing. But really work most often takes place within the context of a team and shared goals. And I think that presents a nice vision of work as like, there's bonds are important to that. And then I think that helps you see where humility is most relevant to work. So I thought maybe we could just start with that piece.
Yeah, that sounds great. We did talk about this idea of professional humility or like humble leadership. And that's an interesting way of approaching it. And there's all these studies that show, well, one, people really enjoy working with humble leaders. So they work much better. The teams are more cohesive. There's more alignment on the mission. And none of that is by chance. It's clear humble leaders are the best leaders. And Jim Collins, Good to Great, he identified humility as one of the key features of a humble leader because they're always willing to admit their mistakes and to learn from everyone and appreciate the good of everyone and to have this idea of it's not just about their own personal success. It's about the team. It's about the company. It's about the country. There's always this sense that it opens us up more and more to the common good. But while that I think is interesting, I've also been looking more into this famous book, Why Marriages Succeed or Fail by John Gottman. It came out now 30 years ago. But in that book, he talks about this fascinating idea of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And this is what you can tell like when marriages are going to be, they're on the rocks. And he did a ton of research, very prominent psychologist, and showed that, in fact, these negative characteristics are all highly associated with the breakdown of a marriage. But I think you could also call that book Why Companies Succeed or Fail, because every single thing he talks about there has also to do with a company, and they're all very deeply tied to humility. So that was one interesting insight, maybe that Gottman has that we can apply in a new way.
Mm-hmm. So, so I see. So basically, because in a marriage, you're talking about a bond and obviously that a team working together. So why companies succeed or fail, why teams succeed or fail. Mm-hmm. I wonder, maybe at some point we can look into like team psychology for sports. I'm sure there's some good insights there. But anyway, I digress. Yeah. So Kevin, what are these 4 horsemen then of the apocalypse?
So just to list them, it's defensiveness, criticism, stonewalling, and contempt. Right. So defensiveness is probably the most common one. And that's how we are defended against admitting our own weaknesses. So we will try to, if people are showing something we could do better, we might, counterattack, is one thing he mentions, or play victim, somehow negate the other person's concerns. So you invalidate the concerns of the other person in some way. And that's done as a defense, kind of casting oneself as being without any fault. And so you can see why that would go directly against humility. And so just to throw out, humility has to be seen as truth. Being able to admit the truth about oneself. Humility is the experience of the truth of oneself. The famous definition of truth being, dare I say it, the adequatio rei et intellectus, which, the identity of the intellect and the thing. So it means the way we see ourselves is the way we really are. And so that really is not about our self-image, which is the way we see ourselves. That has gotten to become transparent. So we experience ourselves as we really are. And that means we're quick to admit our weaknesses. So that, I think, is a good way of not becoming defensive. But then people progress from defensiveness to criticism, which I think is more like the counterattack. This happens easily in a team, where it can be so easy to disagree with, I don't know, what the leaders are saying or what other team members are doing. Instead of really appreciating what other people are bringing to the table, we're critical of them. And this can get so bad. It's like a virus of the mind, critical spirit, we could call it. And where people are just habitually negative about others. And when others act, they are, I've heard people say things like, I cannot see anything good about this person. So that's pretty extreme that they get to the point where you cannot admit it at all.
Before I think we'll get to next too and kind of get deeper into all of these. But so with criticism, so you mentioned this thing of being critical of maybe the decisions a leader has made or the contribution of your teammates or something like that. Now, so it seems like if your team is all working together to achieve a goal, criticism is saying, well, I don't think you're on track, or we're not. We don't have the right plan because the leader failed to strategize appropriately, or we're not on track because this person isn't helping us get there. But then there's another element of, it seems to me that you're more focused, like a teammate might be more focused on what's good for them and not focused on what's good for the team. So they're maybe more interested in like appearing good so that they can get a promotion as opposed to the success of the team. So does that also go against humility, or is that a kind of unrelated phenomenon?
No, I think that's very direct. So people will put their own interests ahead of the common good. So, and particularly anything that makes them look better. So there's a sense in which pride is glorying in one's own excellence in a disordered way. So that you're attributing to yourself as if you were the cause of every good that you have. When in fact, if we're really humble, we're able to admit how profoundly the goods that we see in ourselves are gifts we've received. And even you get down to your very nature, your very being, that we're not the source. We didn't cause ourselves. None of us are like self-caused beings, that brought ourselves into being. We're all brought, we have parents to thank. And so there's always like a sense in which we are not the prime source. And so, I think that if pride is in general this disordered love of self and one's own excellence, glorying in that as if it weren't a gift, then we are going to put our interests ahead of others. And we're going to have a preference to think of ourselves. And so this idea of like self-centeredness is really crucial. And I see humility as being maybe even primarily about attention. And are we really like looking to ourselves always, in our own interests, or are we looking at others and do we have a willingness to serve them? So I think that, maybe if we're really good at admitting our own faults and recognizing all the good that people do, we might come up with this idea that we could aim to be excellent in something. And we could really aim to be excellent in our work because we admit where we need to grow and we see how others do it better. So we're always learning. So that's actually one really important part. But there seems to be something even more humble about having a real preference to consider others, seeing others as a preferable object of one's attention so that we can really have a spirit of service and be looking for more genuinely understanding others and seeing how we can help them. So I think that's this idea that we become less the center stage of our own thoughts, and instead we're more into reality as we really are, and then with the people that are around us.
Do you want to go through the other two then briefly?
Yeah. That actually gets very directly to stonewalling, because stonewalling is the withdrawing from interacting with others. And when a person is stonewalled, they're kind of left in their own thoughts. So the stonewaller will pay the price of then just ruminating about the injuries that the others have done to them, or dreading what's going to, the next interactions. And so again, there's this kind of preference where one's attention is fixated on oneself rather than being able to really attend fully to those around us. And that's what allows us to be a team player.
So at least with criticism, you're at least kind of focused on other people, although you're being critical of them.
Yeah.
But with stonewalling, you're just kind of not even viewing them as worthy of your attention.
Exactly. And that only gets worse then with contempt, which is the bottom. So if contempt is present, then couples are in grave danger. It's reversible, fortunately, so that there's data too that you can walk it back. So it's not like a permanent state. None of these things are. They're just unhealthy habits that people have. And with contempt, people are more sarcastic. Their humor tends to be more hostile. They might have a lot more eye rolling and, in general, like name calling, belittling. All those things now you're actually treating the other person as if they're bad, and you're treating them as if they're all evil. And so that's where you can see pride at its most, as if one has this total superiority fundamentally to the person to whom you have contempt. So that's like the end of bonds. That would be the breaking of bonds.
Before we continue, a brief message. If you're benefiting from these discussions, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. Doing so helps us to reach more people. So you're not just learning, you're also helping others to discover a path of growth and flourishing. Thanks for your support. So, okay, I have a couple questions. So does this seems like kind of I don't know if you'd call it a slippery slope or like a progression of pride. Say, so how does it proceed? I guess, how do you go from one step to the next? Is it just, small behaviors and then it builds up? And I guess there's there's an internal dimension where you feel, start to feel better and better than the other person. And then that's also expressed in small behaviors, and that's like a vicious cycle that compounds until you go through all four of these stages and reach the end. Is that kind of how it works? Or?
I think so. I think, like you see with every vicious cycle, there are these interlocking patterns of negative mastery. So taking defensiveness as the main one, what's the natural outcome of being defensive when others are trying to help you see ways you could grow? Well, you are going to have a fixed view then of yourself, and you're not going to be looking for ways of changing. Instead, you're going to be defending against change, as if it would be an admission that you were wrong all along and as if it would invalidate everything you've ever said or done. So that defensiveness is, I think, the kind of first step. And it leads us to go to the next stage then, which is being more critical of others. And that's because if others are criticizing us, if we are so defended against seeing any weakness we might have, it almost leaves us with the only one choice, which is to go and counterattack.
Right. They have to be wrong.
Yeah, they have to be wrong. You have to invalidate the messenger. And that's why criticism, when you get real critical spirit, it's not just that you're criticizing the behavior of others. You're actually criticizing their character, their whole personality. And so at that stage, people will use these phrases like, you always do this, or you never do this. Clear exaggeration. It's defensive, though. So it goes back to that original thing of being afraid of admitting one's own faults. And then you could see, too, then, what happens if you have developed critical spirit towards the other. Well, you will withdraw from them more and more. And that can only end eventually, because it's not going to bring out the best in the other person unless they're a total saint. So then it's going to lead to more and more contempt.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, then my next question is, is this progression, like, can it ever just be with respect to one other person or one group of people, but then with other people, you're like great and humble? Or would you say that if a person is kind of progressing down these levels, that that's just reflecting kind of a deeper habit that then they're going to tend to manifest in all areas? Or is it like bond specific?
Well, I think, again, as with every vicious cycle, the worse it gets, the more it generalizes. And most people have a public persona that, in fact, does them some good, because they do not allow themselves to outwardly be negative or critical of others, and they try to maintain a positive persona. Now, that may not help the people they live with, because the people you live with, they are on the inside of the public persona. They're seeing you unfiltered. I think that's why these things tend to show up primarily in closer relationships, family relationships. And so it's not necessarily the case that if people are like this at home, this is what they're like at work. My experience is people can be pretty good at work and externally could seem to be extremely good. But then there could be these unhealthy habits at home. But I do think that the worse they get, particularly that first one of defensiveness, I think that's the thing that generalizes the most. And so if you really are shamed by any kinds of feedback that people give you, well, then you can see how that too gets worse and worse. If you take, it might just be that, it's not just when people are trying to insult you, which people may never do, or when people are actually being negative. It might be that you simply suspect they're negative, or they're not positive enough, or they're not superlative enough. So you can see how people get, and defensiveness is a negative form of mastery that people get better and better at applying in more and more situations. And that's the case like every vicious cycle. And so it's like a pseudo-mastery. So I think that the more you've mastered being defensive, the more it spreads. And probably it is the number one obstacle to growth. Because if we are very quick to admit our mistakes, and to admit what we don't know, where we need to grow, we would quickly see that, yeah, there is a little bit of shame or embarrassment at first, but it's not that bad. It's not that scary. I think probably you could extend through all of them, but maybe there are a few people who carry it out perfectly so that they're contemptuous of everyone in every circumstance. That would be pretty far.
Yeah. Okay. Great, Kevin. Well, so we've kind of discussed these, the slippery slope down. So maybe now we could flip the perspective and talk about the ascending scale kind of up, of how you go about reversing all of these things, or if you talk about humility, kind of the virtuous cycle of humility, like what it looks like then to grow in the opposite way.
Yeah. And I think the most remarkable power humility has is to put everything right in our heart. If there's something in our heart that's not right, we should look first and see, how do these affections of our heart move? Augustine had this beautiful teaching that the heart has 4 primary affections: contrition, gratitude, desire, and love. And he at different points stated them differently, but they're all basically those 4. Interestingly, I think he was also the one who noted that no matter what religion you look at on earth, if there's any kind of sacrifice that they make in any form, it has those 4 ends. So the reason, even prehistoric people would have made sacrifices, to the gods, is contrition, or gratitude or desire, like they're petitioning for some good, or adoration or love. So interesting, this idea that these four affections of the heart, are just fundamental to how we relate to the whole universe. And we can tell too how humble we are to some extent by how dominated are we, how alive in our heart are these four affections. And contrition is the beginning of it, because it means this ability to recognize our own missteps. So to own the mistakes that we make. This is what ties into extreme ownership. But it seems like it really goes to this idea of admitting one's faults, and that's a clear expression of humility. Right? So it's essential to humility to be able to own faults, and contrition does that. But in a true way, without blowing them out of proportion, without making them bigger than in fact they are. And that leads to the next one, which is gratitude. So gratitude, so if contrition is directly opposed to defensiveness, then gratitude is directly opposed to criticism. If criticism is focusing on the bad that we see in others or inventing it, then gratitude is seeing and appreciating the good in the other and the good that comes to us from the others. So that's just another essential move of humility. It allows us to be grateful. So how much we experience contrition and gratitude really do give us a sense of how alive is our humility. But the next ones are even more interesting. So desire is what would be opposed to stonewalling. So it's a longing to be closer, a longing to be connected to the other. That desire actually is a preference to attend to other people. And so that preference to attend to the other, that's what allows us then to see humility, I think, in its most proper form. It's about our attention, taking us out of the unreal, which is where we're left if we're stonewalled, and just kind of alone in our own thoughts. That's all unreality. So, and desire moves us back to reality, back to engaging with others. Gottman talks about making bids. So little efforts at stepping closer to those around us. And it's so important that instead of moving away when there's difficulty, that people pull closer together. And that's true in relationships of any kind. But you can see it clearly in teams too. When things get tough, if there's blaming, which is defensiveness and criticism, then people are going to pull away when things get tough versus people pulling together. So again, that preference for the attending to the other and drawing closer, that's enabled really by humility. And the last one is love. And that's most opposed to contempt. Love itself is the bond. It's built on seeing the goodness of the other. And so contempt is always the worst of the horsemen. It kills the bond most directly. But love makes us truly forgetful of self and makes the other's interest our own. So we can truly be centered on the common good, which is the bond, if it's just two, or it's the good of the team and the company and the country. But this is an effect. We're able to actually give our best to serve interests beyond ourselves. So that's the sense in which humility makes us capable of transcending ourselves, transcending our own interests, attending to others, and then giving our best to them.
Well, okay, Kevin, this is a really beautiful vision of kind of the way that humility helps us progress in all these ways and all these important elements. So I guess my question then for you would be, what does one do really to grow in humility, which lies at the heart of all these important ways of growing and developing bonds with other people?
Mm-hmm.
What steps should people be taking here?
So I think that the ability to lose the fear of seeing oneself as one really is. And that requires an ability to examine oneself. So we have ways of throughout the day looking back on how did something go so that we can try to own entirely the opportunity for growth. So we can try to see what could I have done better here. But also then, let's say we're at the end of the day. It's great that people look back at the end of the day. Okay, what were the opportunities to grow that showed up? So what didn't go bad? Particularly, are there things I need to apologize for to others? How could I admit my mistakes? So contrition is important, but also gratitude. Like, what went really well today? What did I receive from the others? And then desire, which is the ability to look to the next day and see what's one thing I can do better. And all of those express a love we have that is capable of serving others, thinking of others, giving our best to others. In fact, every ideal in some way comes down to forgetting self and giving our best to others. So that's why humility is the foundation of our ability to live every ideal. And it makes us capable of bonds. So it makes us capable of actually loving the others. But I think there's a lot more to be said on this. And particularly, there's more to be said on how humility sets the stage for every form of mastery. Because that's where we get excited about growing. The areas where we have to grow, if we're defensive of ourselves, it seems like those are threats. But if we lose that defensiveness, we discover this great capability of being enthusiastic. We have new ways of growing, new ways of improving, and suddenly life feels more like an adventure. So I think that's what we'd hope to show people when we look more deeply in how humility sets the stage for every kind of mastery.
Yeah, Kevin, that sounds great. I mean, we're out of time today, so I think it'll have to wait till next week, but let's cover it.
Great. We'll come back to it.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much, Kevin. This has been awesome.
Thank you, Sharif.
All right. We'll be back next week. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and you're looking for more in-depth guidance, check out OptimalWork.com, our unique platform that delivers content, tools, and exercises to help you thrive at work and beyond.